Margaret Holloway held up the dress and smiled. Wear this tonight. It was faded green. Ugly. Deliberate. Amelia took it without a word. Her aunt's smile widened. You'll attend Nathaniel Brooks's dinner. Sit where I place you. Say nothing. Simply exist as the reminder that even powerful men can be insulted in their own homes. Amelia looked at the dress. Then she looked at her aunt. And if I refuse? Margaret's smile didn't move. Then Thomas loses his room by morning. Amelia put on the dress. If this story moves something in you, stay until the end. Subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. She put on the dress. That was the hardest part, not the humiliation of wearing it. Not the knowledge of why it had been chosen. The hardest part was the decision to put it on anyway. To button each small button with steady hands while the November wind pushed against the single window of her room, and Thomas's voice drifted up from the floor below, reading aloud to himself the way he always did in the evenings. His voice. That was why she put on the dress. Amelia Carter was 26 years old. And she had learned that love was not a feeling so much as a series of decisions, each one smaller than you'd hoped. Each one costing more than you'd planned. She buttoned the last button. She did not look in the mirror. Downstairs, Margaret Holloway was already in her coat. She looked at Amelia from the bottom of the staircase with the expression of a woman inspecting a tool she'd selected for a specific job, not with cruelty. Exactly, but with the particular coldness of someone who had long ago stopped thinking of Amelia as a person and started thinking of her as a resource. You'll do, Margaret said, will I? It was not a question. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't draw attention to yourself. Margaret turned toward the door. Your presence alone will say everything I need said. And what exactly does my presence say? Aunt Margaret. Margaret paused with her hand on the door. It says, she replied, without turning around, that Nathaniel Brooks insulted this family. And that this family has a long memory. She opened the door. Cold air poured in from the street. Come, Amelia. Caroline was already in the carriage. She was wearing ivory real silk, well-fitted, with a small pearl brooch at her throat that Amelia recognized as one that had belonged to her own mother. Given to Margaret as part of some arrangement she'd never been told about and had eventually stopped asking about. Caroline looked at Amelia's dress and did something she probably thought was subtle, a small compression of her lips. Immediately released. The private satisfaction of a woman who has been worrying about her position in a room and has just been reassured. You look cold, Caroline said. The dress is thin, Amelia said. She sat down. That was intentional, a silence. Caroline looked out the window. Margaret arranged her gloves. The carriage moved. Tell me about Nathaniel Brooks, Amelia said. Margaret looked at her sharply. Why? Because you're using me against him tonight, and I'd like to know who he is. The words landed flat and factual in the carriage air. No anger in them, no self-pity. Just the pragmatic request of a woman who had decided somewhere between the second and third button of her dress that she was not going to walk into tonight blind. Margaret studied her for a moment. Then, perhaps deciding that the information cost her nothing, Nathaniel Brooks is 40 years old. He inherited the largest private landholding in 3 counties from his father. He is not married. He was engaged 8 years ago to a woman named Eleanor Vance, 3 weeks before the wedding. A pause. The reasons were never made public. He withdrew from society for 2 years afterward. When he returned, he was different. Different how? Cold, Caroline offered, with the relish of someone repeating something they'd heard at a party. They call him the Stone Gentleman. He doesn't dance. He doesn't flirt. He goes to exactly the social engagements he cannot avoid and leaves immediately after. He refused your business proposal, Amelia said to Margaret. Margaret's jaw tightened slightly. He refused a legitimate partnership that would have benefited both families considerably. He did it through lawyers, without the courtesy of a personal conversation. And he did it in a manner that made it impossible for the refusal to be kept quiet. Her voice was even, but underneath it something old and hot. He embarrassed this family. Publicly, Amelia looked at her aunt. "So tonight," she said slowly, "you want to embarrass him back." "I want him to remember," Margaret said, "that choices have consequences by sending me." The carriage wheels turned on cobblestone. Amelia looked out the window at the dark Virginia road and said nothing more. But she was thinking. She was always thinking. She thought about what Margaret had not said. Because Margaret had told her what Nathaniel Brooks had done, refused the partnership, done it publicly, caused embarrassment, but she had not told her why. And in Amelia's experience, the why was always the real story. The what was just the surface. The why was where people actually lived. She filed it away. She looked at the dark tree line moving past the carriage window, and she filed away everything she'd been told and everything she hadn't. And she built in her mind a careful preliminary map of the evening ahead. She had been a lawyer's daughter. Her father had taught her to walk into every room with a question already prepared. What is actually happening here? Not what people say is happening. Not what the surface shows, but what is actually underneath everything going on. She had asked that question in every room she'd entered since she was 12 years old. She would ask it tonight. Brooks' estate appeared in the carriage window. Her first thought was not what she expected. She had expected something that announced itself architecture of wealth performing for anyone who passed. Instead, the house sat in the dark with its lights on like something that had been there long before anyone was watching and would be there long after everyone stopped. It had the particular permanence of things that have already survived what they needed to survive. She felt unexpectedly something close to recognition. You and I, she thought, looking at the house, have something in common. She did not say this aloud. She stepped out of the carriage. The cold hit her immediately through the thin silk, deliberate. Margaret had chosen correctly, and she straightened her spine against it and walked toward the light. The entrance hall was the performance she expected. Not from the house was simply itself, high-ceilinged and warm, with a particular smell of old wood and beeswax and wood smoke that meant generations of use. The performance came from the people in it. She stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds and read the room. Old money, mostly. The kind that had stopped trying to prove itself and had moved into a more dangerous register, the confidence of people who set the standards rather than meeting them. 2 clusters near the fireplace, maintaining careful distance from each other, which meant existing conflict. A woman in blue watching the door from across the room with the focused attention of someone conducting an assessment. 3 men in a corner whose body language said alliance. Recent, not yet comfortable. And there through the open doors of the dining room a table. And beside the head of the table, set slightly apart from the other chairs, an older chair with a carved back that had been in this house longer than anyone currently standing in it. She looked at it. Something about it caught in her chest in a way she could not immediately explain. She looked away. Margaret moved into the room like a woman who had prepared for this entrance. Within 30 seconds, she had been absorbed into the nearest social cluster, her voice rising to the particular pitch she used when she was being publicly gracious. Caroline followed half a step behind, already scanning for the most advantageous conversation. Neither of them looked back at Amelia. She was meant to be there without being escorted. Visible without being presented, a fact in the room rather than a guest in it. She understood her role. She accepted a position near the far wall and watched. She watched for 12 minutes before he entered. She counted, because counting was something to do, and because 12 minutes was information. A man who kept his guests waiting exactly that long was either careless about social expectation or completely indifferent to it. And from everything she had heard about Nathaniel Brooks, careless seemed unlikely. He came in from a side door. No announcement, no pause for effect. He was already in conversation with an older man beside him. Head slightly inclined, the body language of someone genuinely listening, rather than waiting for his turn to speak. The room responded to him the way a room responds to a shift in weather, not loudly. But completely, conversations recalibrated, postures adjusted. The woman in blue straightened almost imperceptibly. He was tall, dark coat, no embellishment, no jewelry except a plain watch chain. The kind of man who had decided that his presence was sufficient and had been right about that decision long enough that the decision no longer required thought. His face was, she searched for the word, honest. Not handsome in the way that required effort, but honest. The face of a man who had stopped performing something at some point and had not gone back. She found herself wanting to know what he had stopped performing. She found herself wanting to know what it had cost. His gaze moved across the room. She had been in enough rooms to know when someone was genuinely taking inventory versus when they were performing attentiveness. He was genuinely taking inventory, slow, methodical. The way her father had looked at a courtroom before a difficult case. Reading the exits. Reading the alliances. Reading what was actually happening beneath what was on the surface. His gaze crossed her, stopped, returned. He looked at her dress, the faded green. The deliberate wrongness of it. He looked at Margaret across the room. The precise satisfaction on her aunt's face. He looked back at Amelia. She watched him understand all of it, in perhaps 5 seconds. The trap, the intent, the instrument she had been made into. She held his gaze without expression, and something shifted in his, not pity. Not offense, not even surprise, something quieter and more complicated. That she did not yet have a name for. Then he looked away. He continued his conversation. He gave nothing visible to the room. She breathed. She had not realized until that moment that she had been holding herself very still, waiting for the reaction that would set off everything Margaret had planned. He had not given it. She thought, interesting. She thought, "Who are you, Nathaniel Brooks?" She picked at the loose thread on her sleeve, the one she'd noticed in her room, and decided not to fix, because fixing it would have been a kind of hope she hadn't been ready for, and she waited. "Miss Carter," the voice was quiet. Certain. It came from directly behind her left shoulder. And it came without warning, and for a single exposed second, just one, her composure cracked, and she felt the full weight of what the evening was supposed to be. The humiliation her aunt had built and delivered her into. And the breath she drew in before she turned was not quite steady. Then she turned. Nathaniel Brooks was standing 3 feet away with his arm extended toward her. The room had gone still in the way that rooms go still when something has happened that no one was prepared for. "Mr. Brooks," she said. Her voice was level. She was proud of that. "I don't think this is the arrangement that was intended for tonight." "No," he said. "It isn't. You understand what my presence here is meant to communicate." "I do," and she stopped. "I'm offering you my arm, Miss Carter," he said. "That's all. The rest is yours to decide." She looked at the arm. She looked at his face. There was nothing in it that looked like rescue. Nothing that looked like charity. It was the look of a man who had assessed a situation and made a decision, and was now waiting, without any particular pressure, for the other party to make theirs. She took his arm. What happened next moved through the room like a stone through still water. She felt it in ripples, the spreading silence, the heads turning, the conversations dying mid-sentence. She heard Margaret's sharp inhale from across the room, distinct even through the crowd. She kept her eyes forward. She had been humiliated before. She had been stared at before. She had been the object of rooms before, the poor relation, the charity dependent, the girl dragged along to fill a seat. She knew what it felt like to have a room's attention as a weight rather than a gift. This was different. She could not yet say how, but it was. He stopped at the carved chair. She recognized it. She had seen it from across the entrance hall. Had felt something catch in her chest when she looked at it. Had filed the feeling away without examining it. Now she was standing in front of it, and she understood. This chair was not furniture. It was a position. It was a statement. It was something that had belonged to someone who mattered in this house. And it had been kept here, in this place of honor, Because the person who owned this house had not been ready to let it go. Mr. Brooks. Her voice was very quiet, only he could hear. This is your mother's chair. Yes, you can, he said. Equally quiet, and you will. You don't know me. He held the chair. But I know what was done to you tonight before you walked through my door. And I know you walked through it anyway. A pause. Sit down, Miss Carter. She sat. The sound that moved through the room was not quite a gasp. It was the sound of 34 people simultaneously revising their understanding of the evening. Margaret, at the far end of the table, had gone the gray color of someone watching a carefully constructed plan come apart at the load-bearing point. Her hand was on her wine glass, but she was not drinking. She was very still in the way that dangerous women go still when they are recalculating. Caroline was staring at Amelia with an expression that had moved entirely beyond social performance into something raw and unguarded. The man to Amelia's left, white-haired, broad-shouldered, with the bearing of established consequence, leaned fractionally in her direction. Harold Fentress, he said. Your father was James Carter. The lawyer from Richmond, he was, Amelia said. Good man. He said it simply, without the particular condescension of people who note her father's modest success to distinguish it from real achievement. He said it the way you say something true. He argued the Whitfield boundary case in '71. I was in the courtroom. He was the best prepared man in the room, and he knew it, and he didn't need anyone else to know it. Amelia's throat tightened. Briefly and unexpectedly. That sounds like him, she said. Fentress nodded. He returned to his soup. She picked up her spoon. Across the table she felt Margaret watching her. She did not look up. The attack came from Gerald Whitmore, which she had not predicted. She had identified him within 3 minutes of sitting down heavyset, flushed with the particular confidence of a man who had drunk enough to believe he was sharper than he was. Some existing grievance with Nathaniel visible in every glance he sent down the table. She had clocked him as a threat, but had placed him lower on the list than the more obvious dangers. She had miscalculated. He waited until the second course, a calculated choice. She realized after, because by the second course the wine had loosened the room, and an audience was more likely to laugh. I'll say this for you, Brooks. Whitmore's voice carried. You've always had an eye for the unconventional. Several people looked up. The table arrangements, for instance. He let his gaze move to Amelia, not lingering. Not long enough to be called deliberate, just enough. Most men in your position would have been more careful. The implication spread across the table like something spilled. Amelia felt it land on her. She felt the quality of the room's attention shift, the particular shift that happens when a room decides that someone is the subject of the conversation rather than a participant in it. The old Amelia, the Amelia from 3 hours ago, standing in her room with the dress in her hands, would have lowered her eyes. She was sitting in a different chair now, Mr. Whitmore. Her voice came out exactly as she intended, pleasant. Clear, the pitch her father had used in courtrooms when he wanted every person in the room to hear without feeling addressed. Whitmore looked at her with the mild surprise of a man who hadn't expected the subject to speak. I wonder if I could ask you something, she said. He hesitated. Certainly. When a man uses a woman he's never spoken to as a public commentary on his host, she said. What do you imagine that communicates about the man? The table went quiet. Not the polite quiet of people being courteous. The specific, arrested quiet of people who have just seen something unexpected happen and are waiting to see what happens next. Whitmore's face reddened. I don't see that I made any... You don't need to explain, Amelia said. The same pleasantness. Not aggressive, she was not fighting him. She was simply holding a mirror up and letting him see himself in it. I'm genuinely asking. I've noticed over many years of attending dinners I wasn't entirely welcome at, that the men who comment most loudly on who belongs at the table are usually the ones with the most uncertain claim to their own seat. She tilted her head slightly. I've always wondered what that uncertainty feels like from the inside. Does it feel like confidence? It looks like confidence from here. But so does fear sometimes. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. Then Harold Fentress, to her left, made a sound brief. Involuntary, suppressed immediately, that was unmistakably a laugh. Whitmore said nothing. His wineglass went to his lips. He did not speak again for the remainder of the course. Nathaniel, beside her, said nothing for a long moment. Then very quietly, "Your father taught you that?" She looked at her plate. "He taught me that a courtroom is just a room," she said. "And a room is just people. And people, regardless of how they're dressed or where they're sitting, respond to the same things." A pause. "Truth delivered without cruelty tends to end arguments faster than anything else. Most people find it harder than it sounds," Nathaniel said. "Most people are angry when they do it," she said. "Anger makes you sloppy. You telegraph what you're about to say before you say it, and the other person has time to prepare." She picked up her wineglass. "My father said the most dangerous thing in a courtroom was a calm woman. Because nobody saw her coming." A silence. "He was right," Nathaniel said. She looked at him. He was looking at her, with that expression again, the one she had first seen across the entrance hall when his gaze had returned to her face. She still didn't have a name for it. It was not attraction. Not exactly, or not only. It was the look of a man encountering something he had stopped expecting to find. "You're wondering why I'm here," she said, "in that dress." "With Margaret Holloway." "I know why you're here," he said. "I'm wondering why you came." She was quiet for a moment. "My brother is 15, she said. "He still believes things will be fair eventually." "I don't want to be the reason he stops believing that." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. "How old were you," he said carefully, "when you stopped?" She returned to her food. 12, she said. But I kept it to myself. She had let her guard down. That was the mistake. She had been so focused on Whitmore, on the room, on managing every angle of the evening, that she had allowed herself a moment of actual conversation, genuine exchange. The kind she had not had in 4 years, and she had forgotten. For 6 minutes, to watch Margaret. "Amelia, dear." The voice came from the far end of the table like a scalpel. She felt the room's attention pivot. She looked up. Margaret was sitting with her hands folded, her face arranged into the expression of warm social concern that she deployed with the precision of a weapon. "I hope you're comfortable," her aunt said. "I know this sort of gathering is—" Quite new word chosen. Every word a small blade. "I know this is new for you. You don't belong here. This sort of gathering, this level, this class, this world. Comfortable, are you, really? In that dress, in that seat?" The table was listening. The table was always listening. The old Amelia would have smiled and deflected, would have given Margaret the small victory of public deference. Swallowed the blade, smiled over the wound. She thought of Thomas. She thought of her father in a courtroom, calm and prepared and utterly certain of what he was worth. She thought of the chair she was sitting in, and the woman who had sat here before her, and what it meant that the man beside her had offered her this seat, knowing exactly what he was doing. "I'm very comfortable, Aunt Margaret," she said. Her voice was warm. Her voice was steady. Her voice was the voice of a woman who had made a decision about something tonight that she had not fully made before tonight, and whose hands were not shaking. "Thank you for thinking of me." A pause. "Family is family," she said. "Isn't it?" It was not a question. Margaret's smile did not move, but something shifted behind her eyes, a micro-adjustment. A recalibration, the look of a chess player who has just realized that the piece she discarded 3 moves ago has somehow ended up on the wrong side of the board. "Indeed," Margaret said softly. She reached for her wine. Her hand was not quite steady. Amelia noticed that. She filed it away. Nathaniel said nothing, but under the table, almost invisibly, the hand that had been resting on the arm of his chair moved just slightly, just an inch toward her side, touching, not offering. Just present. She did not look at it, but she felt it. And something in her chest, something that had been braced and locked and armored since the moment she buttoned the last button of the faded green dress, eased a single careful fraction. The candles had burned lower. The conversation around the table had resumed louder now. Wine loosened, the performance of the evening's second act underway. People had begun the particular recalculations that happen mid-dinner when the room's hierarchy has been visibly disrupted, and everyone is pretending they haven't noticed while very carefully noticing. Amelia sat in the carved chair in the ugly dress with her spine straight and her hands steady. She had survived the first attack. She had held the room. She had said what needed to be said and left no wound that could be cleanly traced back to her. But she was not foolish enough to think it was over. Margaret was still at the end of the table. Margaret was still thinking. And somewhere in the calculus of this evening, in the spaces between the wine and the candlelight, and the careful social performances, there was still a move Margaret hadn't made yet. Amelia could feel it the way her father had taught her to feel the moment in a trial when the other side had something they hadn't shown yet. Wait, he had always said, watch. The best lawyers don't react to what's happened. They position themselves for what's coming. She picked up her fork. She took a breath. She waited. She was ready. The night was not finished with her. But she was no longer the same woman who had walked through the door. Something had shifted in the room, in the chair, in the 6 inches of space between her hand and his. She did not yet know what it meant, but she knew this. She had been sent here to disappear, and she was still here. The dinner moved into its second hour, and Amelia had learned something important about Nathaniel Brooks. He was watching Margaret the same way she was. She noticed it in the way his attention shifted, not obviously. Not in a way that anyone else at the table would have caught, but every time Margaret reached for her wine glass. Every time her aunt leaned toward the woman beside her to murmur something private. Nathaniel's focus adjusted. Precisely. He was waiting for the same thing Amelia was waiting for. That told her something. He had been in rooms like this before. He had survived them. And he had learned the way she had learned. That the most dangerous moment in any social ambush was never the opening strike. It was the second one, after you'd already relaxed. She filed that away too. You've gone quiet, Nathaniel said beside her. His voice was low, meant only for her, I'm thinking, she said. About what my aunt hasn't done yet. Then you think she has something else. I think Margaret Holloway has never in her life walked into a room without a secondary plan. Amelia picked up her water glass. She's too still right now. She's been too still for the last 10 minutes. That means she's waiting for something. Or someone. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. You know her well, he said. I've lived in her house for 4 years. Amelia set the glass down. I know her the way you know weather in a place you can't leave. Not because you want to, because your survival depends on it. Something crossed his face at that brief. Deep, quickly controlled. She caught it only because she was already watching him carefully. And because she had learned to read the faces of people who had decided to stop showing their faces. He had recognized something in what she said. She wondered what. She did not ask, not yet. The man who arrived was named Silas. She heard his name move through the table in whispers before she saw him. Greer. Greer's here, and the reaction told her more than any introduction could have. 3 people at the far end of the table straightened almost imperceptibly. One woman touched her necklace in the unconscious gesture of someone suddenly aware of their valuables. Harold Fentress, to her left, set down his fork with a deliberateness that suggested controlled feeling. Silas Greer was thin, 50s, with pale eyes and the unhurried movement of a man who had learned that entering a room slowly gave him more information than entering it quickly. He was not announced. He simply appeared in the doorway of the dining room with a glass already in his hand, as though he had materialized from the woodwork of the house itself. He scanned the table. His gaze passed over Amelia without stopping. Then it moved to Nathaniel. Something passed between them across the length of the dining room, wordless. Complex with the specific charge of history, not anger. Exactly. Something older than anger. something that had been sitting between two people long enough to harden into a permanent feature of the landscape. Brooks, Greer said, pleasantly, in the tone of a man who understood that pleasantness, deployed correctly, was more threatening than hostility. Greer, Nathaniel's voice was completely neutral. I wasn't expecting you tonight. Margaret was kind enough to extend an invitation. Greer's gaze moved to Margaret at the far end of the table, who had arranged her face into polite surprise that fooled no one. I hope it isn't an inconvenience. Not at all, Nathaniel said. But his hand on the arm of his chair had closed into something very close to a fist. So that was Margaret's second plan. Amelia felt the pieces assemble with the cold, clear click of a mechanism snapping into place. She didn't know yet what Silas Greer was to Nathaniel. The history between them was visible but unreadable, like text in a language she'd encountered but not studied. But she knew that Margaret had invited him deliberately. She knew that his arrival had been timed for exactly this moment, when the dinner was deep enough in that exits were social obligations and Nathaniel had nowhere to go. She knew that whatever was coming next was going to be worse than Whitmore. Greer settled into a chair that was brought for him with the efficiency of a household that had been briefed in advance, and Amelia noted that Margaret had clearly planned this arrival, had arranged the extra setting, had positioned Greer's seat at the precise angle that allowed him to address Nathaniel directly across the table. She looked at Margaret. Margaret was looking at Greer. And for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, something moved across her aunt's face that was not triumph or strategy or cold calculation. It was desperation. Amelia filed that away and said nothing. Greer made his opening move within 4 minutes. He was better at it than Whitmore, smoother, more patient. The kind of man who understood that a blade you don't see coming cuts deeper than one you do. He spent those 4 minutes in apparently innocent conversation with the woman beside him, talking about land prices in the western counties, laughing at something she said, appearing entirely at ease. And then, without any visible transition, I heard you turned down the Harrison contract. Nathaniel. Word travels, Nathaniel said. In these circles always, Greer swirled his wine. Seemed like a sound investment from where I was standing. Tillman Harrison doesn't offer partnerships lightly. Most men in your position would have jumped at it. Most men in my position, Nathaniel said, don't make decisions based on what most men would do. No, Greer smiled. No, you never have. He paused, as though searching for the word interesting about you. The pause did exactly what it was designed to do. Particularly given everything that happened with the Vance family. The room went still. Not the polite still of before. The held breath still of people who know a wound has just been touched and are waiting to see if it bleeds. Amelia watched Nathaniel's face. He showed nothing. Not even the controlled containment of someone suppressing a reaction, just nothing. The blankness of a man who had rehearsed this particular moment many times and had decided, long ago, on exactly what he would and would not allow it to do to him. The Vance family, he said, has nothing to do with the Harrison contract. Of course not, Greer said. Still pleasant, still smiling. I only mention it because, well, a man who's been burned once tends to become cautious about partnerships generally. Business or otherwise, he let the smile reach his eyes. It's understandable, it's human, but it can limit a man over time, wouldn't you say? He was not looking at Nathaniel when he said the last part. He was looking at Amelia. The shift was so subtle that half the table missed it. But Amelia didn't miss it, and Nathaniel didn't miss it. Greer's gaze on her lasted only a second, just long enough to make his meaning clear to everyone who was paying attention. The implication moved through the air like smoke. Look at what he's brought to his own table tonight. Look at what passes for a partnership now. Look how far the stone gentleman has fallen. Amelia felt the heat of it land on her face. She felt the room register it. And she felt something shift in Nathaniel beside her, not the controlled blankness of before. Something hotter. Something that had moved from management into the territory of actual feeling. She made a decision. She did not think about it. She did not plan it out in the careful courtroom way she had learned. She simply felt what the moment required and she acted. "Mr. Greer," she said. He looked at her with the mild surprise of a man who had not expected the scenery to speak. "I'm curious," she said. "You've mentioned the Vance family twice now in the last 2 minutes." Once would be an observation. Twice is a choice. She tilted her head. "What are you hoping he'll do?" Greer blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "When you press on a man's wound in public," she said. "Pleasantly, you're hoping for a reaction. You want him angry, or embarrassed, or defensive, so the room sees something that confirms whatever story you're already telling about him." She looked at him with genuine curiosity. "But he's not giving you any of that. So I'm wondering what your plan is for the next 30 seconds. The table had stopped pretending to have other conversations. Greer's pleasant expression held, but something behind it had shifted a recalibration. The look of a man reassessing the terrain. "I don't believe we've been introduced," he said. "Amelia Carter," she said. "James Carter's daughter." The lawyer. A pause. "The Holloway dependent." He said it simply, without visible malice. He didn't need malice. The phrase was designed to be its own wound, a clean, factual reduction of her to her most diminished definition. Dependent, a word that meant you have nothing of your own. You belong to someone else's table. She felt it. She let herself feel it for exactly 1 second. Then she said, "Yes. Though I find that people who lead with a woman's financial situation rather than her name tend to do it, because they don't have anything more interesting to say about her." Someone at the far end of the table made a sound. Fentress, to her left, was looking at his plate with an expression of intense concentration that did not fool anyone. Greer looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something she had not expected. He smiled, not the performed smile of before, but something smaller and more real. "You're James Carter's daughter." Yes, I can see that now." He turned back to his wine. He did not look at her again for several minutes. But the pressure in the room had changed. Nathaniel said nothing until Greer was absorbed into a conversation at the other end of the table. Then quietly, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said. "He'll remember it." "I expect so. That may cause you difficulty later." She looked at him directly. "Mr. Brooks, I came here tonight wearing a dress chosen specifically to make me look ridiculous, as a social weapon in a plan designed to embarrass you." Difficulty and I are well acquainted. A silence. "Why did you do it? Just now, with Greer?" She considered the question. "Because he was using your wound to perform for the room," she said. "And that's—" She paused, searching for the honest word. "That's cowardly. Whatever happened between you and Eleanor Vance, it belongs to you, not to this table." Nathaniel was very still. "You don't know what happened," he said. "No," she agreed. "I don't. Most people in this room have a version of it. I'm not interested in their version," she said. "I never am. Second-hand stories are mostly about the person telling them." He looked at her. That expression again, the one she had no name for. The one she had first seen in the entrance hall, when his gaze had returned to her face. It was deeper now, more complicated, like a door she'd knocked on without expecting it to open. "My mother would have liked you," he said quietly. She looked at the chair she was sitting in. She did not say anything. But something in her chest cracked open, just slightly. In the particular way that unexpected kindness cracks things that have been sealed shut for a long time. Margaret moved at the 40-minute mark. Amelia felt it coming, felt the quality of the room shift the way air shifts before lightning. That particular pressure change, that meant something large was about to happen. She had been waiting for it. She had known it was coming. And yet when it came, it was from a direction she had not predicted. "I wonder," Margaret said, her voice lifting to Carrie, "if I might share something with the table." The table gave her its attention. Margaret's face was arranged in the expression of a woman reluctantly performing a social duty, the look of someone who has a truth they would prefer not to tell, but feel obligated to tell for the benefit of everyone present. Amelia recognized the expression. She had seen it before. It was the face Margaret wore when she was about to do the most damage. "It concerns Amelia," Margaret said, "and I mention it only because I feel as her family that honesty is kinder than silence." Amelia's hands were in her lap. She pressed them flat against her thighs. "Several months ago," Margaret continued, her voice warm with performed reluctance, "Amelia entered into a correspondence with a young man. A correspondence that was a pause, timed perfectly, not appropriate, given the difference in their social positions. The young man's family wrote to me directly, as her guardian, to express their concern." The table was perfectly silent. Amelia's mind moved faster than it had moved all evening. She knew what this was. She knew the correspondence Margaret was describing. She knew every detail of it, because she had lived it. And it was nothing like what Margaret was implying. She opened her mouth. "The young man in question," Margaret said, before Amelia could speak, "was the son of a business associate of my late husband's. He showed Amelia some kindness, took pity on her situation. I believe, and she, I'm afraid, mistook that kindness for something more. The letters she sent were," another pause, "rather desperate. I'm afraid. Quite embarrassing for everyone involved." The word desperate landed in the room with a particular weight. Amelia understood what Margaret had done. She had taken something true, the correspondence, and wrapped it in enough implication and strategic omission to make it into something that had never happened. The young man had not shown her pity. He had been a friend of her father's, a law clerk, and they had exchanged letters about her father's unresolved cases. Professional correspondence, nothing more. But Margaret had chosen her words carefully. Mistook kindness for something more, desperate, rather embarrassing. The room heard, "This woman has no dignity. This woman is exactly what we thought she was." Margaret looked down the table at Amelia with a gaze of practiced sympathy. "I only mention it," she said softly, "because I want people to understand Amelia's situation with compassion. She has had a very difficult life. We all fear to hardship in our own ways." The silence lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds was enough. 4 seconds was the difference between a wound and a scar. Amelia sat very still. She felt the room's attention on her like heat. Like the specific quality of heat that comes from a fire that has been built deliberately. Tended carefully, directed precisely. She felt what was expected of her, the options available to a woman in her position in a moment like this. Apologize, deflect, shrink, cry. She thought of Thomas. She thought of her father's voice. The most dangerous thing in a courtroom is a calm woman, because nobody sees her coming. She thought of the chair she was sitting in, and the woman who had sat here before her, and what it meant that she was here at all. And she thought clearly, coldly, with the particular clarity that comes not from anger, but from something deeper and more stable than anger, that Margaret had just made the mistake of fighting her on ground where she had spent 4 years acquiring information. She took a breath. "Thank you, Aunt Margaret," she said. Her voice was even, her voice was warm. Her voice was the voice of a woman who had decided something. "I think you're right that honesty is kinder than silence," she said. "So I'd like to be honest too, if you don't mind." Margaret's eyes narrowed fractionally. "The correspondence you're describing," Amelia said, "was between myself and William Garner, who was my father's law clerk for 6 years and is now practicing in Alexandria. The letters concerned 3 unresolved cases from my father's files, 2 property disputes and 1 inheritance matter, in which my father's clients had not yet received the outcomes they were owed." She looked down the table at her aunt. "I have copies of every letter. The content is entirely legal and professional." A murmur ran through the table. "William Garner's family did write to you," Amelia continued. "That much is true. They wrote to ask if you would release the files from my father's office that you had assumed control of when we came to live with you." She paused. "The files you declined to release. The files that would have allowed 3 families, none of whom could afford additional legal fees, to recover what was legally theirs." Margaret's face had gone very still. "I mention it only," Amelia said, with the precise gentleness of a scalpel, "so people understand the full picture. with compassion. As you said, the room was absolutely silent. Harold Fentress, to her left, had turned to look at her fully. His expression was unreadable. His eyes were sharp and attentive in the way that meant he was reassessing something completely. At the far end of the table, Silas Greer was watching Amelia with an expression that was no longer strategic. It was simply interested. Margaret recovered quickly. She always recovered quickly. That was one of the things Amelia had both studied and reluctantly admired about her. The gray had come and gone from her face in seconds. And now she was simply composed again, the mask back in place, the calculation running behind her eyes. "Well," Margaret said lightly, "I see I've perhaps simplified the situation." "It happens," Amelia said. "You have a remarkable memory for things that matter," Amelia said. The table exhaled. Conversations resumed carefully, with the heightened pitch of people who have just witnessed something significant and are deciding how to process it. Amelia picked up her fork. Her hand was shaking just slightly. Just enough that she felt it, a fine tremor in her fingers that no one at the table could see but that she felt the full weight of. She pressed her fork into her food and held it steady by will alone. Nathaniel saw. She knew he saw because he shifted in his chair barely. Almost nothing, and his arm moved to rest on the table in a position that placed his hand 3 inches from hers. Not touching, not offering, but present the same way it had been earlier. "Like a wall you can't see but feel you're shaking," he said. "Quiet. For her alone," she said. "You don't have to." "I'm not leaving," she said. A pause. "I know," he said. "I wasn't going to suggest it." She looked at him. "I'm shaking," she said quietly, "because I'm angry. Not frightened. There's a difference." "I know the difference," he said. The way he said it told her that he did, that he had felt both and could distinguish between them without being told. "She had 4 years," Amelia said, her voice barely above a breath. 4 years of letters, conversations, documents, every private thing I've done or said or tried to do. She's kept all of it. She was building it." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "She wasn't improvising tonight. None of this is improvised. No, she planned every piece of this. The dress, Greer, the story about the correspondence." Amelia pressed the fork harder against the plate. "She came here tonight to destroy me in front of a room full of people who would remember it. And she used me as the vehicle." "She underestimated you," Nathaniel said. "She may still be right," Amelia said. "The room heard what she said before I could answer. That sticks. Even when the correction comes, the first version sticks." He was quiet for a moment. "Some of them," he said, "not all." She looked at the table at Fentress, who was in quiet conversation with the man beside him, but whose gaze kept returning to her, at Greer, who had moved into a different register entirely, at the woman in blue across the table, who had set down her fork and was looking at Amelia with an expression that was not pity. It was something closer to solidarity. Amelia had not expected that. She had not known to look for it. The woman's name was Catherine Aldrich, and she spoke to Amelia during the dessert course. She did it directly, without the social pretense of addressing Nathaniel first or establishing her own credentials. "Your father's name was James Carter," she said. "He represented my brother in a land dispute in 1869. He refused to settle when everyone told him to settle. And he won. My brother's family has been on that land ever since." Amelia looked at her. "I didn't know that," she said. "He never took the full fee," Catherine said. "He said my brother couldn't afford it. He took a third." She paused. "That kind of man doesn't raise the daughter Margaret Holloway just described." Amelia's throat tightened. "No," she said after a moment. "He doesn't." Catherine Aldrich picked up her dessert spoon. "I'll be calling on you," she said, "if that's agreeable." Amelia looked at her. "That's agreeable," she said. It was Fentress who delivered the blow that ended the evening's campaign. He did it with the quiet authority of a man who had been in enough rooms to know when a moment required someone withstanding to speak. He set down his fork. He looked at Margaret at the far end of the table with the expression of a man who has decided that courtesy has its limits. Margaret, he said, not aggressively. Simply with the particular weight of someone who is speaking a thing that is going to land. Margaret looked at him. James Carter argued 23 cases in this county over 15 years, Fentra said. He won 19 of them. 3 of the remaining 4 were settled in his client's favor before they reached verdict. A pause. I was in many of those courtrooms. His daughter sat in the gallery and watched every case she could. She was 11 years old the first time I saw her there. She brought a notebook. The table was listening. I don't know what correspondence you're referring to, Fentra said. I don't know what letters or situations you've been describing tonight. But I know the Carter family, Margaret, and what you've described tonight. He paused. One precise does not fit what I know. The silence that followed was total. Margaret held his gaze for 4 seconds. Then she looked down at her plate. And for the first time all evening, she said nothing at all. The dinner ended 40 minutes later. The guests moved into the formal sitting room in the way of people processing a meal that had given them considerably more than food. Conversations reformed in new configurations, the alliances of the evening shifting. Recalibrating, people finding new positions on ground that had been altered beneath them. Amelia stood near the fireplace and breathed. Just breathed. In and out deliberately, the way her father had taught her to breathe after a difficult session in court, not celebration. Not relief. Just the simple necessity of drawing air into lungs that had been working hard and needed a moment of maintenance. Margaret had left the dining room without looking at her. That was notable. That was, she suspected, the most significant thing that had happened all evening. 4 years, and Margaret Holloway had never once left a room without looking at Amelia. The look was always part of it, the reminder that Amelia's position was at Margaret's discretion, that her presence was Margaret's gift and could be withdrawn. Tonight Margaret had not looked. Amelia did not know yet whether to be relieved or afraid. She'll go for Thomas. The voice came from directly behind her. And she turned to find Nathaniel Brooks standing closer than she expected. His voice low enough that it carried to no one but her. Her blood went cold. What? That's what I would do, he said. If I were her and I'd just lost that much ground in a room full of witnesses. I'd go for the thing that still gives me leverage. Amelia stared at him. Thomas, she said. Her voice was flat. She can't hurt you publicly anymore tonight. You've closed those doors. But your brother's situation, that's private. That's yours. She can reach that without witnesses, he paused. You need to send word to him tonight. Before she does. She was already calculating. Thomas was at the Holloway house. There were 3 servants who could be trusted, Martha in the kitchen, who had known her father, and 2 others who had shown her small kindnesses over 4 years and might, if asked carefully, help. I need to send a note, she said. I'll arrange it, Nathaniel said. One of my people can have it there within the hour. She looked at him. Why are you helping me, she said. Truly, not. She stopped. Shook her head. Not the social reason, the real one. He was quiet for a moment. Because Margaret Holloway weaponized a young woman and brought her into my house, he said. And whatever game she's playing, whatever she wanted from tonight, she used you to play it. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I don't accept that. In my house or anywhere else. That's principle, she said. That's not personal. No, he said. After a moment. It stopped being just principle somewhere around the second course. She held his gaze. Something moved in her chest, not the careful, guarded thing she'd been carrying all evening, but something more exposed and more real, the feeling of a person who has been braced for a blow for so long that when something gentle comes instead, the body doesn't quite know what to do with it. She looked away first. I'll write the note, she said. Thank you. She wrote it in his library, which he showed her to without ceremony, a room that smelled of books and old leather, and the particular quiet of a space that had been used seriously for a long time. A desk, paper, ink. She sat down and she wrote quickly. Thomas, stay in your room tonight. Do not speak to Aunt Margaret if she comes home before me. I will explain everything in the morning. I love you. Trust me. She folded it, she sealed it, she handed it to the man Nathaniel sent for, and she stood in the library doorway and watched it carried out into the night. Then she stood in the library alone for a moment. She pressed her hands flat against the door frame. She thought, I have made an enemy tonight, she thought. I made that enemy 4 years ago. Tonight I simply stopped pretending otherwise. She thought, Thomas. She breathed. She straightened her spine. She walked back into the evening that was not yet finished with her. Margaret was waiting in the entrance hall. Not by accident, by arrangement. She was standing in her coat, already prepared to leave, with Caroline beside her, and the particular set to her shoulders that meant she had decided something. Amelia walked toward her without slowing. They stopped 3 feet apart. For a moment neither of them spoke. The house sounds moved around them, voices from the sitting room, the distant clatter of the kitchen, the wind against the front windows. You've made tonight very complicated, Margaret said. You made tonight complicated, Amelia said. I just didn't cooperate with your version of it. Margaret looked at her, really looked at her. The way she hadn't in 4 years, without the screen of calculation or strategy. Just looked. Your father, she said slowly, was a difficult man to argue with. I know, Amelia said. You're very like him. I know that too. Margaret's gaze moved over her, the dress, the chair she had sat in, the evening she had survived, and something moved through the older woman's face that was not warmth. Not apology, but was not nothing either. Thomas's room is his, Margaret said. I won't touch it. Amelia looked at her. For now, Margaret added. And the edge was back, and the moment, whatever it had been, closed. She turned and walked out the front door. Caroline followed. Not looking back, Amelia stood in the entrance hall alone. She let out a breath that had been accumulating for approximately 4 hours. Nathaniel found her there. She's gone, he said. I know. Are you all right? She considered the question with the genuine attention it deserved, because she had learned long ago that the most honest answer to "Are you all right?" was never the first one that came to mind. I'm tired, she said. I'm angry. She paused. I'm more grateful than I know how to say without it sounding like something it isn't. It can sound like exactly what it is, he said. She looked at him. What is it, she said. One person recognizing that another person held their ground when it cost something, he said. That's what it is. That doesn't require a category. She looked at the door her aunt had walked through. She looked at the house around her, the entrance hall, the dining room beyond it, the carved chair she could see through the open doorway, sitting exactly where it had always sat. Your mother, she said. Who was she? He was quiet for a moment. A woman who believed that how you treat the people you don't have to be kind to is the only real measure of character, he said. She said everything else can be performed. That can't. Amelia thought about that. She was right, she said. Yes, Nathaniel said. She usually was. Outside. The Virginia night pressed cold against the windows. Inside, something between them unnamed, unannounced, arrived at through a dinner that had been designed to destroy both of them and had somehow failed, sat in the entrance hall air, like the first careful note of something neither of them had expected to hear again. Amelia did not name it. She was not ready to name it. But she did not walk away from it either. The note reached Thomas at 9:30. Amelia knew because Nathaniel's man came back with a single line written in Thomas's careful, deliberate hand, the handwriting of a boy who had taught himself to write neatly, because neatness was one of the few things in the Holloway house that no one could take from him. I understand. I'm not afraid you. She read it twice. Then she folded it and pressed it flat against her palm and held it there for a moment. The way you hold something small and warm when the rest of the world is cold. Good news? Nathaniel asked. My brother, she said. He's all right. She paused. He asked if I was afraid. Are you? She thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. But not of the right things. I'm not afraid of Margaret. I'm afraid of what I started tonight that I don't know how to finish. Nathaniel looked at her steadily. What did you start? I stopped pretending, she said. and I don't know yet what that costs. What it cost became clear within 48 hours. The first sign came from Martha, the kitchen servant at the Holloway house, who slipped a folded piece of paper under Amelia's door the morning after the dinner. Amelia read it before Thomas was awake, standing in the gray November light of her small room, with the faded green dress folded on the chair where she'd left it the night before, folded neatly, deliberately, as though the act of folding it could contain everything it represented. Martha's note was brief. Margaret had been in correspondence with a man named Reverend Hollis, who ran a small church school 60 miles south of Richmond. The school took in children of limited means for modest fees. It was not unkind exactly, but it was 60 miles away. And Thomas was 15, which meant 3 years before he was legally his own person, and could not be placed there without Amelia's consent that Amelia, as a dependent member of the Holloway household, had no legal standing to withhold. She read the note, she read it again. She set it on the small table and she sat down on the edge of the bed, and she was very quiet for a long moment. Then she stood up, she put on her coat, she went downstairs. Margaret was at breakfast, which Amelia had expected. Caroline was not, which Amelia had also expected. Caroline slept late when the social events of the previous evening had required sustained performance, and last night had required a great deal of it. The two women sat at opposite ends of a table that was smaller and less formal than Nathaniel's, but felt, this morning, considerably more dangerous. Margaret poured her tea. She did not look up. "You're awake early," she said. "I didn't sleep well," Amelia said. She sat down. She poured her own tea. "I've been thinking about Reverend Hollis." Margaret's hand paused on the teapot, just for a fraction of a second. Then she set it down with a steady hand and picked up her cup. "Martha," she said quietly. "Martha has known my family since before I was born," Amelia said. "She knew my mother. She watched my father argue his first case. What she does for us, she does because she chooses to. And no amount of Martha will be let go by the end of the week," Margaret said. The words landed like something dropped from a great height. Amelia stopped breathing for a moment. "Margaret, don't." Her aunt's voice was not loud. It was the worst thing. It was quiet and certain. The voice of a woman who had been planning this since the carriage ride home last night and had arrived at breakfast fully prepared. "You made your choices last night, Amelia. Very publicly. Very clearly. Now we are both dealing with the consequences. Martha has nothing to do with what happened last night. Everything in this house has to do with what I decide it has to do with," Margaret said. She looked at Amelia directly for the first time since sitting down. "That is what you seem to have forgotten. This is my house. Thomas's situation, Martha's position, your own circumstances, all of it exists within this house. And this house is mine." Amelia looked at her aunt across the breakfast table. She felt something she had not felt in 4 years, not the managed, strategic calm she'd built for herself, not the careful armor of silence and patience. Something rawer than that. Something that was close to grief. Because she understood, looking at Margaret's face, that there was not going to be a version of this where Margaret was reachable, where the thing that had happened between them could be navigated into something livable. She had known it for 4 years, perhaps. She had chosen, for 4 years, not to know it fully. "What do you want?" Amelia said. Margaret tilted her head slightly, the way she did when she was deciding how honest to be. "I want what I've always wanted," she said. "Order. Propriety. The understanding that there are structures in this world and that people occupy them correctly." She set down her cup. "Last night you decided to step outside the structure you occupy. That has consequences. The structure I occupy," Amelia said slowly, "is the one you built for me, not the one I was born to. You were born to a man who died in debt and left 2 children for someone else to manage," Margaret said. Not unkindly. The cruelty of it was in the flatness, not the delivery. "That is the structure you were born to." "Amelia, I did not build it, I simply operate within it." Amelia stood up. Her chair made a sound against the floor. "I will find another arrangement," she said. For myself and for Thomas. Give me 30 days. Margaret looked up at her. 20, she said. 30. 25, Margaret said. And Martha stays until then, Amelia nodded once. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. She walked out of the dining room. She walked out of the front door. She stood on the street in the cold November morning and breathed and breathed and breathed, and did not allow herself to think about what 25 days actually meant, or what it required, or where on earth she was going to find solid ground when the ground inch she'd been standing on had just dissolved beneath her feet. She allowed herself 30 seconds of that. Then she straightened her spine and started walking. She went to Catherine Aldrich first. Catherine had said, "I'll be calling on you the night before." And Amelia had taken that at face value without examining it too carefully. But now she needed to examine it, because Catherine Aldrich was a woman of standing in Richmond society, and standing was, at this precise moment, the one resource Amelia had absolutely none of. Catherine received her without ceremony, which was itself a statement. "Sit down," Catherine said, when Amelia was shown into her sitting room. "You look like you've been walking fast in the 420 minutes. 30, Amelia said. She sat. "Tell me what happened," so Amelia told her. Quickly, without self-pity, the way her father had taught her to present a case, facts first. Context second. Emotion only where it was specifically relevant to the argument. She told her about Martha's note and the breakfast and the 25 days, and Thomas and what Margaret had said about the structure people occupied, and where Amelia was supposed to occupy hers. Catherine listened without interrupting. When Amelia finished, Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What a position," Amelia said immediately. "Something with income. Something that establishes me as not dependent. Something that gives me legal standing to contest any arrangement Margaret tries to make regarding Thomas. That's 3 things." Catherine looked at her. "You're not asking me for help. I'm asking you for opportunity," Amelia said. "There's a difference." Something in Catherine's expression shifted approval. "Precise and unperformed. My household accounts are in disorder," Catherine said. "They have been for 2 years. I've had 3 different people attempt to manage them, and none of them understood what they were looking at." She paused. "Could you manage accounts?" "My father ran a law office," Amelia said. "I managed his accounts from age 14 until he died. That's not the same as a private household." "No. But the principles are identical, and the scale is smaller. I could have your accounts in order within 6 weeks." Catherine looked at her for a long moment. "The position would need to be formal," she said slowly. "With salary." "Yes," Amelia said. "It would need to be documented." "That's yes." Catherine stood up. "I'll have my solicitor draw up the agreement today," she said. "You'll begin Monday." Amelia stood. She thought for a moment that she might cry. Which would have been the first time she'd cried since her father's funeral. And she held it back the same way she'd held it back then, by finding something specific and concrete to focus on. A detail in the middle distance that was simply real and present, and not the feeling. The detail she found was a small clock on Catherine's mantel, its brass hands pointing to 9:15. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Catherine said. "Your father won my brother's land back. This is 30 years late, and the least I can do." She paused at the door. "Have you told Nathaniel Brooks about your situation?" Amelia looked at her. "No," she said. "He'll find out," Catherine said. "Richmond is smaller than it seems." "I know," Amelia said. "But it needs to be my problem to solve first, before it's anyone else's." Catherine studied her for a moment. "Yes," she said, "I can see why it would." Nathaniel found out 3 days later. She had known he would. Catherine had essentially told her he would. But knowing it was coming and managing the moment it arrived were different things. And when his card appeared at Catherine's door on Thursday morning, Mr. Nathaniel Brooks requests the honor of a brief conversation at her convenience, Amelia felt the particular quality of complicated feeling that comes when something you've been both hoping for and dreading arrives at the same moment. She sent back a note. 4 o'clock. Carter's Coffee House on Main Street. Miss Carter. She chose the coffee house deliberately. Not his estate, not Catherine's house, a public, neutral location where the conversation could be what she needed it to be, which was practical and clear, and not confused by the weight of his library, or the carved chair, or any of the other things that had accumulated between them in the last 3 days like weather building in a closed room. He arrived at 4 exactly, which she had expected. He sat down across from her without the performance of social preamble, which she had also expected. "Catherine Aldrich tells me you've taken a position with her," he said. "Catherine Aldrich has a loose definition of private information," Amelia said. "She has a protective definition of people she's decided to care about." He looked at her steadily. 25 days, she said. "She told you that too?" "Yes." Amelia wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and looked at him. "I handled it," she said. "I know you did. I don't need." "I know that too," he said. Amelia. It was the first time he had used her given name, and it landed differently than she had expected, not with formality, but with a kind of quiet familiarity, as though it had been there all along and had only now found the right moment to emerge. "I'm not here to rescue you." She looked at him. "Then why are you here?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because 3 nights ago," he said, "a woman I had never met sat at my mother's table in a dress chosen to humiliate her, and held that room together by sheer force of intelligence and will. And then she protected me from a man who had been needling my worst wound for years. And then she wrote a note to her 15-year-old brother to make sure he wasn't afraid." He paused. "And I've been thinking about that ever since. And I wanted to tell her that I have." The coffee house moved around them, voices at other tables, the sound of cups, the street noise from outside. Amelia looked at him. She felt the thing in her chest again, the crack in the sealed place. The one she'd felt when he'd said his mother would have liked her. It was wider now. It had been widening, she realized, for 3 days, in the specific way that things widen when you try very hard not to think about them. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Someone easier to dismiss," she said honestly. Something moved in his face, almost a smile, not quite. "Eleanor Vance," Amelia said carefully. He went still. "You don't have to," she started. He said. He stopped. Started again. "She left because I couldn't give her what she needed. Not money, not position, something else. Something I had closed off. After my father died, I built walls around certain things. She needed them open. She was right to leave." Amelia listened. "Greer was her cousin," Nathaniel said. "He blamed me. He's been blaming me in every room he can find for 8 years. A pause. "He's not entirely wrong. He is entirely wrong," Amelia said. "Whatever you closed off, whatever you couldn't give, that's a private grief between 2 people. It's not a public debt." He looked at her. "You have an extraordinary capacity," he said slowly, "for being angry on other people's behalf." "I have a low tolerance," she said, "for people using private pain as a social weapon. I've been on the receiving end of it." "Yes," he said. "I know. I have a proposal," he said. She looked at him carefully. "What kind of proposal?" "A practical one." He leaned forward slightly. "My estate manager retired 6 months ago. I haven't replaced him because I haven't found anyone I trusted with both the financial management and the human element. The workers, the tenants, the people who depend on the land functioning well." He looked at her directly. "I'm offering you the position." Amelia stared at him. "You're offering me a job," she said, "a formal position. With salary, documented, legally establishing your independence from Margaret Holloway's household." She kept staring. "You've known me for 3 days," she said. "I've known you for 1 dinner," he said. "That's enough." She stopped. "That's not rational." "No," he said. "It isn't. But I've watched you manage a roomful of people who wanted to destroy you. Protect a man you'd met an hour earlier, plan 4 moves ahead while appearing completely composed, and write a letter to your brother in my library that took you 45 seconds and said everything it needed to say in 6 lines. He held her gaze. "I know how to read people, Amelia. It's the only skill I fully trust. And what I read in you is someone I would trust with the estate and with the people on it." She was quiet for a long moment. "Catherine's position," she said. "Keep it," he said immediately. "The two aren't mutually exclusive. Catherine's accounts are part-time work. My estate requires full management. Both are salaried. Both are documented. People will talk," she said. "People are already talking," he said. "They've been talking since I gave you my mother's chair." "The talking ship has sailed, Miss Carter." She almost laughed. She hadn't almost laughed at anything in 4 years. She pressed her hand flat on the table and looked at him and thought about Thomas reading in the kitchen corner, and Martha's note under the door, and 25 days, and the structure you were born to, and the structure you build for yourself, and whether those two things were always different or could, under the right circumstances, be made to converge. "I'll need to see the accounts," she said. "Of course. And I'll need to speak to the tenants myself before I accept. Also, of course. And if I find something in the management I disagree with, I need to be able to say so directly with Amelia," he said. "Yes, to all of it. Saturday," she said. "I'll come to the estate Saturday and review the accounts." "Saturday," he agreed. She picked up her coffee cup. Her hand, she noted, was completely steady. She told Thomas that evening. She sat on the edge of his narrow bed in the small room that Margaret had assigned him, the one with the window that faced the back garden, which was not the best room in the house, but was not the worst either, and which Thomas had made his own through the careful arrangement of his books and the particular way he'd positioned his desk to catch the afternoon light. And she told him everything. She told him about the dinner, about the chair, about Whitmore and Greer and Fentress and Catherine Aldrich, about Margaret and the breakfast in 25 days, about the coffee house and Nathaniel Brooks and the proposal. Thomas listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she loved most about him. He had learned, in 15 years of being a Carter, that the person speaking needed the space to finish. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you going to take it?" "I'm considering it." "That means yes," Thomas said. She looked at him. "It means I'm being careful," she said. "You're always careful," he said. "But you've already decided." "I can tell, because you're sitting on the left side of the bed, and you only sit on the left side when you're telling me something you've already decided, and you're waiting for me to agree, so you feel better about it." She stared at him. "When," she said, "did you become perceptive?" "I grew up watching you survive Margaret Holloway." "It was an education." He paused. "Is he a good man?" She thought about it. "I think so," she said. "I think he's a man who was hurt and decided to become smaller than he is. And I think he's reconsidering that decision." Thomas looked at her with the particular directness of a 15-year-old who has not yet learned to be indirect. "Do you like him?" he said. "Thomas." "Because I think you do," he said. "And I think you're trying very hard not to, because it would make things complicated." She stood up. "Get some sleep," she said. "That's a yes," Thomas said. "Good night, Thomas, Amelia." His voice stopped her at the door. She turned. He was looking at her with his father's eyes, the same dark, steady, honest eyes that had looked at her across 100 courtrooms and 100 difficult moments and always said the same thing. "I see you. You're enough. You've been trying to save me for 4 years," he said. "I know that. I've always known that. But you're allowed to have something for yourself, too." She looked at her brother for a long moment. She did not trust herself to speak, so she simply nodded once. And she went to bed, and she lay in the dark and did not sleep for a very long time. Saturday came. She arrived at Brooks Estate at 10 in the morning, alone, without the faded green dress or Margaret's arrangements or any of the architecture of that first evening. Just Amelia Carter in her own coat with her own notebook in her own hands, walking up the drive to a house she had last entered as someone else's weapon. Nathaniel met her at the door himself, no butler, no ceremony. Just him in shirt sleeves, which she had not expected, which somehow told her more about him than anything he'd said in the coffee house. "The accounts are in the study," he said. "I've had the last 3 years pulled." 5 years, she said. I'll need 5 to see the pattern. He looked at her for a moment. 5, he said. Of course. They walked into the house together. The accounts were a disaster. Not a catastrophic disaster, not fraud or collapse or anything that couldn't be repaired. But the kind of slow accumulating disorder that happens when a capable man loses interest in the details and begins operating on instinct alone. Expenses that should have been renegotiated years ago. Tenant arrangements that had drifted from their original terms without formal amendment. A water rights agreement with a neighboring property that had not been reviewed since Nathaniel's father signed it and had, in the intervening years, become significantly unfavorable. She worked through the morning and into the early afternoon. Nathaniel came and brought her tea without asking if she wanted it, which she noted, answered her questions directly, without defensiveness. When she found something that needed explaining, and left her alone when she needed to think, which was frequently, it was the alone when she needed to think that impressed her most. Most men in her experience experienced a woman's silence as a problem to be solved. He experienced it as information. She filed that away. At 1:30, she sat back from the desk and looked at what she had in front of her and thought about how to say it. It's repairable, she said when he appeared in the doorway. But it will require someone paying attention consistently, she said. Not occasionally, not when the situation becomes urgent. Consistently. She looked at him. The tenant arrangement on the North Field hasn't been formally reviewed in 9 years. The Garrity family has been farming that land for what amounts to 30% more than their original agreement entitled you to receive. And they probably know it, which means either they feel guilty about it or they're waiting for you to notice. He leaned against the doorframe. Which do you think? He asked. I think they feel guilty about it, she said. From what I've seen of the correspondence, they've been trying to renegotiate 3 times and being passed to people who weren't authorized to respond. She paused. If you visit them directly, next week and propose a revised agreement at a fair rate, not the full amount they've been underpaying. Just a fair going forward rate, you'll have the loyalty of that family for a generation. He was quiet for a moment. That's not what most estate managers would recommend, he said. Most estate managers would recommend maximizing short-term income, she said. I'm interested in what actually works over time. He looked at her. My father would have liked you, he said. You said your mother would have liked me. Both of them, he said. You'd have been insufferable at family dinners. She looked at him. He was smiling a real smile, not performed, the kind that moved all the way to his eyes and changed his whole face into something warmer and more open than the stone gentleman that Richmond society had been describing to her all her life. It was, she thought, an extremely dangerous smile. She looked back at the accounts. I'll take the position, she said. I know, he said. Don't be smug about it. I'm not smug, he said. I'm relieved. There's a difference. She wrote something in her notebook so she would have a reason not to look at him. The water rights agreement with Caldwell Property, she said. Keeping her voice professional. That needs a lawyer. I know a good one, he said. Garner, she said immediately. William Garner in Alexandria. He was my father's clerk. He's thorough and he's honest and he's significantly cheaper than whoever you're currently using. Done, he said. She looked up from her notebook. You agreed to that very quickly. You recommended him, he said simply. That's sufficient. Something moved through her at that, a wave of something she was not going to name. Not here. Not in this study with the accounts spread across the desk and the professional distance she was trying to maintain. She pressed it flat and held it there. I'll need a contract, she said. My solicitor can have one drawn by Monday. I'll have Catherine's solicitor review it before I sign. Naturally, he said. I wouldn't have it otherwise. She closed her notebook. She stood up. She looked at him across the desk, in the afternoon light of his study. In the house she had first entered 3 nights ago as a weapon, and was now standing in as something else entirely. Something she was still working out the name for. Why did you really give me her chair, she said. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Because Margaret sent you in that dress to be invisible," he said. And I looked across the room and saw a woman who had decided, before she even walked through my door, that she was not going to be invisible. And nobody in that room had noticed yet. He paused. I noticed, and I thought someone should say so. Amelia looked at him for a long moment. "That's the most anyone has done for me," she said carefully. "In 4 years. That," he said, "is a failure of everyone around you." Not a gesture on my part. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. "Monday," she said. "Monday," he agreed. She walked toward the door. "Amelia," she stopped. She turned. He was standing by the desk, one hand resting on the stack of accounts. Looking at her with that expression, she still didn't have a complete name for the one she'd first seen in his entrance hall. That had deepened at the table, that had been present in the coffee house and was present now. She thought in this moment that she was beginning to understand it. It was the look of a man who had closed something off. As he had told her, after Eleanor Vance, after grief, after the years of being the stone gentleman in rooms full of people who wanted things from him. It was the look of that closed thing beginning carefully, painfully, with the specific caution of someone who had learned what it cost to open to open. "Thank you," he said, "for Saturday. I reviewed your accounts," she said. "Don't thank me for that, not for the accounts," he said. She held his gaze for one moment, then she put on her coat. And she walked out of the study, and she walked through the entrance hall, past the dining room, where the carved chair sat in its place of honor. And she walked out the front door of Brooks' estate into the cold November afternoon. And she did not allow herself to think about the expression on his face until she was 300 yards down the drive and certain that no one could see her. Then she stopped walking. She pressed both hands against her face. She breathed. She thought, "This is going to be so much more complicated than the dinner." She thought, "I know." She thought Thomas was right. She put her hands down. She kept walking above her. The Virginia sky had gone the particular deep blue of late afternoon. And somewhere behind her, in a house that was becoming something other than the backdrop of a single terrible evening, Nathaniel Brooks was standing in his study, looking at a stack of accounts that were already beginning to become, for the first time in years, something other than evidence of his own inattention. Neither of them knew yet what the next weeks would bring. But something had shifted in the November air, something that smelled like cold and wood smoke and the specific cautious, terrifying possibility of beginning again. And Amelia Carter walked toward it with her spine straight and her hands steady and her father's voice quiet in her memory, telling her the one thing he had always told her when she was afraid of what came next. "Keep walking. The ground is there. You just can't see it yet." She kept walking. The contract arrived Monday morning. As promised, Amelia read it 3 times before sending it to Catherine's solicitor. Not because she didn't trust Nathaniel, she had decided. Somewhere between Saturday afternoon and Monday morning, that she did trust him, which was itself a fact she was still adjusting to, but because her father had taught her that trust and verification were not opposites. They were partners. You trusted people enough to work with them. You verified documents because documents were not people and had no feelings to hurt. Catherine's solicitor sent back 2 minor suggested amendments, both of which Nathaniel accepted without negotiation, which told her something. A man who argues every clause is protecting himself. A man who accepts reasonable amendments without argument is protecting the relationship. She signed the contract on Tuesday. Thomas, when she told him, simply nodded and said good. Then he went back to his book. Then he looked up again and said, "Does he know about the Garrity situation?" And she said she had already told him. And Thomas nodded again with the expression of someone whose assessment has been confirmed and returned to his book. She moved out of the Holloway house on Wednesday. Martha packed her things. Margaret did not come out of her room. The Garrity family lived on the North Field in a house that had been built by the grandfather and maintained through 3 generations of careful, Practical people who understood that land was not a possession, but a relationship, something that required constant tending, or it turned on you. Amelia visited them Thursday morning, before she'd been in the estate position for a full week. She went alone, which she had told Nathaniel she preferred and which he had accepted without the particular performance of concern that men sometimes deployed when women proposed doing things independently. He had simply said, "Take the gray mare. She knows the North Road." The gray mare did know the North Road. Samuel Garrity met her at the fence line. He was sick, weathered, with the careful eyes of a man who had been passed over by 3 different estate representatives in 2 years, and had learned to be skeptical of anyone coming from the main house. He looked at her. "You're the new manager," he said. "I am," she said. She offered her hand. He shook it, which she had not been certain he would. "I've reviewed the accounts from the last 5 years. I wanted to speak with you directly about the rental arrangement." His jaw tightened slightly. "I've been trying to speak to someone about that for 2 years. "I know," she said. "That stops now. Can we talk?" They talked for 2 hours. By the end of it, Samuel Garrity had a fair revised agreement, a firm handshake, and the particular expression of a man who has been waiting so long for something reasonable that when it finally arrives, he is not certain it is real. "You're not what I expected," he said as she mounted to leave. "So I've been told," she said. "From the main house." They usually send men," she said. "People who don't listen," he said. "Gender's got nothing to do with it. Listening's got everything to do with it." She looked at him. "Mr. Garrity," she said, "if anything comes up, anything on the land, anything with the arrangement, anything you think I should know, come to me directly. Not through intermediaries, directly." He nodded once. The nod of a man making a real agreement, not a social one. She rode back to the estate with the morning sun on her face, and the weight of something that was not yet happiness, but was in the same family, the specific feeling of work that mattered. Done well, producing a result that was going to outlast the morning. She had missed that feeling. She had not known until it returned how much she had missed it. Nathaniel was waiting at the stable when she returned, which she had not expected. "How did it go?" he asked. "He's a good man," she said, dismounting. "He's been trying to do the right thing for 2 years and nobody would talk to him." She handed the reins to the stable hand. "We have a revised agreement. I'll have it written up this afternoon for your signature." "Good." He fell into step beside her. "He's been farming that land for 30 years. His father farmed it before him." "I know," she said. "He told me." "Did he tell you about the drought year?" 1871. She looked at him. "No. The crop failed completely. My father forgave the entire year's rent without being asked." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "Samuel Garrity has never once been late since. Not in 15 years. She thought about that as they walked. "You know your tenants," she said. "I know the ones who've been here long enough to matter," he said. "I've lost track of the details. That's where I need help." He glanced at her. "That's where you've already helped." "I've been here 6 days," she said. 6 productive days, he said. She did not let herself smile. Because she was making a deliberate effort to maintain professional clarity in a situation that had several very clear opportunities to become something else. She was managing this carefully. She was being sensible. "I need to visit the Eastern tenants next week," she said. "And I want to review the equipment contracts before the end of the month." "Of course," he said. "Use whatever you need. I'll need your signature on 3 documents by Friday." "Done. And I want to speak to William Garner about the water rights agreement before the end of November." "I've already written to him," Nathaniel said. "He'll be here next Friday." She stopped walking. She turned to look at him. "You wrote to him before I'd confirmed I wanted to use him," she said. He met her gaze steadily. "You recommended him. I acted on the recommendation. I might have changed my mind." "You wouldn't have," he said simply. "You don't recommend things you might change your mind about." She stared at him for a moment. He was right. That was the irritating part. "In the future," she said, "please confirm with me before acting on my suggestions." "Of course," he said. My apologies. He said it without any indication of finding it funny, which somehow made it worse, because she suspected he found it very slightly funny and was choosing not to show it, which was its own form of considerateness that she did not know quite how to respond to. She walked into the house. The letter from Silas Greer arrived on the following Tuesday. It was addressed to Nathaniel, but Amelia saw it because she was in the study when it arrived, and Nathaniel, who had apparently decided with minimal fanfare that she was someone he showed things to, simply handed it to her after reading it. She read it. Then she read it again. He's claiming the water rights agreement is fraudulent, she said. He's been claiming that for 3 years, Nathaniel said. He has a property adjacent to the Caldwell land. If the agreement is overturned, it benefits him directly. He's not wrong that the agreement has problems, she said carefully. I identified 3 clauses last Saturday that are ambiguous at best and invalid at worst. I know, which means if he takes this to court before we renegotiate, he wins, Nathaniel said. Or at least he has a strong case. She set the letter down. When does Garner arrive? Friday. Can you move it to Wednesday? Nathaniel looked at her. I'll write to him today. She picked up the letter again and read it a third time, looking for the thing she had learned from her father to always look for in a legal document, not what it said, but what it was trying to do, what outcome it was designed to produce. She found it in the 4th paragraph. He's not planning to go to court, she said. Nathaniel looked at her sharply. What? If he were planning to go to court, he wouldn't have sent this, she said. This letter is careful in ways that a court filing wouldn't need to be. He's left himself escape routes in every paragraph. She set the letter down. He sent this because he wants you to come to him. He wants to negotiate privately before this becomes public. Why would he negotiate privately if he has a winning case? Because winning the case isn't what he wants, she said slowly, working it out as she spoke. Winning the case would take years and cost money and create enemies. What he wants is the outcome the case would produce, the water rights reverting without the cost of actually litigating it. She looked at Nathaniel. He wants you to offer him a settlement. Nathaniel was very still. And if I don't? Then he files, and you spend 2 years in litigation over a contract your father signed without proper review. And even if you win, you've spent 2 years and significant money winning. She paused. He's calculated that it's cheaper for you to settle. Is he right? She thought about it honestly. Possibly, she said, depending on what he's asking for. She looked at the letter again. He hasn't told you what he wants yet. That's the next move. He's waiting to see if you'll reach out first. And if I don't reach out, then he escalates, she said. He files a preliminary complaint, makes it public, makes it more expensive to ignore. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. What would you do? He said. She looked up. I wouldn't wait for him to escalate, she said. I'd write back today, not conceding anything, not indicating any weakness in the current agreement, but acknowledging that you've received his letter and that you have retained legal counsel and are reviewing the situation. That tells him you're not panicking, which is the most important thing to tell him. Men like Greer operate on other people's panic. Take away the panic and you take away half his leverage. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. Then he went to the desk and picked up a pen. Tell me what to say, he said. She pulled up a chair and sat across from him, and they wrote the letter together, she dictating, he writing in his precise, spare hand, both of them working through the exact weight of every word with the particular focused attention of 2 people who understand that language. Used carefully is its own form of action. When they finished, Nathaniel read it back. That's exactly right, she said. He signed it. He looked at it for a moment before folding it. You learned this from your father, he said. I learned it by watching him lose cases he should have won because he waited too long to act, she said. The learning came from the watching, not from what he taught me. Nathaniel looked at her. That's a careful distinction, he said. It's an honest one, she said. He sealed the letter. He looked at her across the desk. I want to tell you something, he said, about Eleanor. She went still. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said. I want to, because you've trusted me with a considerable amount of yourself these past 2 weeks, and I think you deserve to know the thing that Greer knows, and that Margaret Holloway probably knows by now, and that will likely be used against you if he paused. If this continues, she waited. He looked at the sealed letter in his hands. Eleanor left because I was in love with someone else, he said. The room was very quiet, she knew it, he continued. She had always known it, I think. We had agreed to the engagement for practical reasons, our families wanted it. It made sense on paper, we were fond of each other. But she knew I was elsewhere, and she was brave enough to name it when I wasn't. A pause. She deserved better than fond, and she went and found it. She's been happily married for 5 years. Who were you in love with? Amelia said carefully. He looked at her. A woman who worked on my father's estate, he said. The daughter of one of the tenant farmers. She was extraordinary. She left Virginia when I became engaged to Eleanor. She thought she was doing the right thing. His voice was completely level. But underneath the levelness, she heard it, the old weight of something that had been carried a long time. She was wrong. But by the time I understood that, she was gone, and I had no way to find her without it being the worst possible thing for her. Amelia said nothing for a long moment. Greer knows this, she said. Greer knows a version of it. The version that makes it salacious. Pathetic. The rich man who threw over his fiancée for a farmer's daughter and then lost her anyway. He looked at her directly. If you are associated with me publicly, that story will be aimed at you. Not because it's true in the way he'll tell it, but because it will be used to imply that I have a pattern of poor judgment in the women I allow into my professional circle. She understood immediately. He'll say you hired me the same way, she said. Not for my competence. For yes, Nathaniel said. And Margaret will say it first, she said. Because she already suspects it and it costs her nothing to say it. Yes. She sat with that for a moment. Does it change anything, he said. What I've told you. She thought about it honestly. The way she tried to think about everything without the interference of what she wanted the answer to be. No, she said. You were in love with someone. You made choices that hurt people and that hurt you. That's being a person. That's not a pattern of poor judgment. She paused. The woman on your estate, was she treated well by you? By your father? He looked at her steadily. Yes, and you let her go because you thought it was right for her. I thought it was right for her, he said. I was wrong about that too. I should have asked her what she wanted, instead of deciding for her. Amelia felt something move through her at that, not at the admission itself, but at the specific thing he was taking responsibility for. Not I lost her, but I made a decision on her behalf without asking her. The difference was everything. I appreciate you telling me, she said. You would have found out, he said. Probably, she agreed. But there's a difference between finding out and being told. She paused. He held her difference. Yes, he said. There is. Margaret came to the estate on a Thursday. Amelia heard her arrive from the study, the particular sound of Margaret's carriage, which she would have recognized anywhere after 4 years. The specific rhythm of the horses and the way the wheels sat on gravel. She set down her pen and waited. She did not have to wait long. Margaret came into the study without being announced, which told Amelia that whoever had opened the door had either not known better or had been overridden. She made a note to speak to the household staff about that. And then Margaret was in the room, and Amelia was standing, and they were looking at each other across the estate manager's desk. Margaret looked around the study. You've settled in quickly, she said. It's been 2 weeks, Amelia said. Sit down, Aunt Margaret. Margaret sat. She looked at Amelia at the desk, the documents. The specific quality of occupation that comes from someone doing real work in a space, and her expression was doing something complicated that Amelia did not immediately have a reading for. I came to tell you something, Margaret said. All right, Silas Greer came to see me on Monday. Amelia's attention sharpened. She kept her face neutral. Did he? He wanted information, Margaret said. About you. About your father's cases, your time in my house, the correspondence with William Garner. She paused. He was thorough. He asked good questions. What did you tell him? Amelia said. Margaret looked at her hands. I told him, she said slowly, that you were James Carter's daughter, and that James Carter was the most honest man I'd met in 30 years of Richmond society. She paused again. Longer this time, and that his daughter was exactly like him, which was both her greatest strength and the most irritating thing about her. Amelia stared at her. Margaret looked up. I didn't tell him anything useful, she said. Not for what he's building. The silence between them was a different kind of silence than any they'd had before. Not the silence of managed hostility or strategic assessment. Something older. Something that had been waiting under everything. For a long time. Why? Margaret's jaw tightened slightly. Because Greer is building something that will hurt you, she said. And whatever has passed between us, you are my brother's child. She stopped. Started again. Your father and I disagreed about almost everything. For most of our lives. But he was honest in a way that She stopped again. I made choices after your uncle died that I am not proud of. Using you the way I did at the dinner. That was. She looked away. That was your uncle's death speaking, not good judgment. Amelia sat very still. You were protecting the business, she said carefully. I was protecting what was left of the life I'd built with a man who is no longer here to help me protect it, Margaret said. That is not the same thing. But it felt like the same thing at the time. Another silence. Thomas's school fees, Margaret said. I'll continue paying them. For the remainder of his education. Whatever you decide about your own arrangements, Thomas's education is separate. It isn't leverage. It should never have been leverage. Amelia looked at her aunt. She thought about 4 years of silence and patience and the faded green dress on the bed and 25 days and all the weight of everything Margaret Holloway had been and done and chosen. She thought about what her father had said about complicated people, that most people who did harmful things were not evil but frightened. And that frightened people struck out at whatever was nearest. And that understanding this did not mean excusing it. But it meant you could see clearly. She was seeing clearly now. Thank you, she said, for Thomas and for what you told Greer. Margaret nodded once. She stood. She looked around the study one more time. He's a better man than I gave him credit for, she said. Brooks. I'm aware, Amelia said. Something moved across Margaret's face, the very edge of something that might, in different circumstances, have been a smile. I know you are, she said. She walked out. Amelia sat at the desk and listened to the carriage leave, and breathed very carefully in and out for a full minute. Nathaniel found her still at the desk an hour later, staring at a document she had not actually been reading. Your aunt was here, he said, I know. She came to see me. He looked at her face. Are you all right? She warned me about Greer, Amelia said. And she said some things I didn't expect her to say. He sat down across from her. He waited. She told him what Margaret had said the whole conversation. Precisely, the way she told him things that mattered. Without editing for the parts that were complicated or unclear. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. She protected you, he said. Yes, that surprises you. Everything she said tonight surprised me, Amelia said. I've lived in her house for 4 years and I thought I understood her completely, and she walked in here today and showed me 3 things about herself I had never seen before. She paused. My father always said that the moment you think you understand a person completely is the moment you've stopped listening. He was right. He sounds like he was right about most things, Nathaniel said. Most things, she agreed. Not everything. He trusted the wrong people professionally. Twice, and it cost him. She looked at the desk. He was too honest for his own good sometimes. He couldn't read people who operated in bad faith because he couldn't quite believe people operated in bad faith. But you can, Nathaniel said. I learned to, she said. After he died and Margaret took us in and I understood that not everyone in the room was working from the same set of principles. She paused. It's a useful skill. It's a lonely way to move through the world. Being the person who can see the bad faith before anyone else does. He looked at her. You're not moving through it alone right now, he said. She met his gaze. The thing between them, the unnamed thing that had been building since the dinner. Since the coffee house, since Saturday in the study. Since every conversation where they had told each other true things without flinching was present in the room with them now, in a way that she could no longer manage around. She was not going to be able to maintain professional clarity indefinitely. She had known that for approximately 10 days. Nathaniel, she said. Yes, the woman from your father's estate, she said. The one you were in love with. He looked at her steadily. Did you stop, she said, eventually. Did it pause? It changed, he said. I don't know if it stopped. I think grief doesn't stop. It just makes room. He looked at her directly. It's made room. She held his gaze. I need to tell you something, she said. All right. I came to this position because I needed independence, and you offered it fairly, she said. That's the true reason. And I intend to continue doing this work well, because it matters and I'm good at it, and neither of those things is going to change regardless of anything else. I know, he said. But, she said. But, he said quietly. And the word was not a prompt, it was just acknowledgement. He was not going to finish the sentence for her. He was going to wait. She thought about Thomas saying, "You're allowed to have something for yourself, too." I think, she said carefully, that I would like to know what this is. Between us, if you're willing to find out. He looked at her. I've been willing to find out, he said, since you told Gerald Whitmore that confident men are usually frightened men, and then went back to your dinner without waiting for the applause. She looked at him. That was the first night, she said. Yes, he said. It was. She breathed. We should be careful, she said. About Greer. About how this looks publicly while the water rights situation is unresolved. About Amelia, he said. We can be careful, he said. And we can also stop pretending this is something it isn't. He looked at her steadily. Those two things are not in conflict. She looked at the man across the desk, the man who had given her his mother's chair on the worst evening of her year, who had written to her brother's solicitor before being asked, who had told her about Eleanor and the tenant farmer's daughter without being asked, who had let her work in his library and asked nothing of her silence and accepted her amendments without negotiation and looked at her consistently, as though she were exactly what she was, and that was entirely sufficient. She thought about the faded green dress. She thought about the carved chair. She thought about the ground you can't see yet, and walking toward it anyway. All right, she said. All right, he said. Outside the study window. The November afternoon had gone the deep gold of late light. And somewhere across the estate, in the direction of the Northfield, Samuel Garrity was farming land that had belonged to his family for 30 years under terms that were finally, after all this time, fair. And in the study of Brooks' estate, two people who had both learned to survive on careful silence looked at each other across a desk covered in the work of a life being rebuilt, and said nothing more, because nothing more needed to be said. Not yet. But something had opened, and neither of them was going to close it again. William Garner arrived on a Wednesday, not a Friday. Amelia met to Selge at 7 in the morning. A note from Nathaniel slipped under the door of the small house on the estate grounds, where she and Thomas had been living for 3 weeks. The one that had stood empty since the previous estate manager retired, and that Nathaniel had offered without ceremony, and which Thomas had claimed immediately by installing his books on every available surface within 48 hours. The note said, "Garner is here. Greer filed yesterday. Come when you're ready." She read it once, set it down, picked up her coffee, drank it standing at the table while Thomas ate breakfast across from her, watching her face with the particular attention of a boy who had learned to read weather systems by studying his sister. "How bad?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said, "but bad. Greer moved faster than I expected, she said. Which means he has something we don't know about yet. Which means today is going to be long. She set down the cup. Don't wait up. I never wait up, Thomas said. I just happen to still be reading when you get home. She put on her coat. Eat something other than bread today, she said. You never do. She walked out the door. Garner was younger than she expected, late 30s. Lean, with the precise and slightly tired eyes of a man who read contracts the way other people breathed. Constantly and without particular joy, but with complete necessity. He stood when she entered the study and shook her hand with the directness of someone her father had trained. Miss Carter, he said, your father would be appalled by this water rights agreement. I know, she said. I've been appalled by it for 3 weeks. Sit down and tell me what Greer filed. They sat. Garner opened his case and laid out 3 documents on the desk with the efficiency of someone who had been arranging bad news for a living long enough to do it cleanly. Nathaniel stood to the side, which she noted not at the head of the desk. Not in the dominant position. To listening. Letting her and Garner work. He filed a quiet title action, Garner said. Claiming the 1868 agreement was executed without proper authority, specifically that the Caldwell representative who signed it didn't have the legal standing to bind the property. Is that true? Nathaniel said. It's complicated, Garner said. Is it true? Amelia said. Garner looked at her. Partially. How partially? The representative had verbal authorization, but not written authorization, Garner said. In 1868, that was common practice. By current legal standards, it's a vulnerability. Meaning Greer can win, Nathaniel said. Meaning Greer can make a credible case, Garner said carefully. Whether he wins depends on the judge and how the precedents are read. He paused. He's also filed in Richmond Circuit, which is home ground, Amelia said. Yes, she looked at the documents. She picked up the filing. She read through it, not quickly, the way you read when you're looking for a conclusion, but slowly, the way her father had taught her to read legal documents, looking for the architecture of the argument, where it was strong, where it was built on assumption, where the load-bearing walls were. She found it on page 4. He's claiming the verbal authorization was given by James Caldwell, she said. Correct, Garner said. James Caldwell died in 1871, she said. 3 years after the agreement was signed. Yes. Which means his estate went through probate. She looked up. Which means there's a probate record. Which means the verbal authorization, if it existed, would have been listed in the estate inventory as an outstanding obligation or agreement. She set down the filing. Did you check the probate record? Garner stared at her. Then he opened his case again and pulled out another document with the expression of a man who was both cramped and slightly embarrassed. Page 12, he said. 3rd paragraph, she found it. She read it, she set it down. The verbal authorization is listed, she said. It's in the probate inventory as a binding agreement made on behalf of the Caldwell estate. She looked at Nathaniel. Greer either doesn't know this exists or is counting on us not finding it. Nathaniel looked at Garner. Which is it, he said. I don't know, Garner said. But if he doesn't know, we file a response citing the probate record and his case collapses in the preliminary hearing. A pause. And if he's no, then he's planning something else, Amelia said. The filing is a distraction. The room went quiet. She thought about Silas Greer at the dinner table, the pleasant smile, the careful pauses, the precision of every word. She thought about what she'd said to Nathaniel weeks ago. Men like Greer operate on other people's panic. She thought about the letter. The escape routes in every paragraph. He wants us in a courtroom, she said slowly. Garner looked at her. That's where he filed. Not this courtroom, she said. A different one. He wants us focused on this filing. Spending money on this response, worrying about this judge in this circuit while he prepares something else. She looked at Nathaniel. What does Greer actually want? Not the water rights. What does he want from you? Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. There's a parcel, he said. On the western edge of the estate. It borders his property. He's been trying to acquire it for 6 years. My father refused. I refused. It's not strategically important to us. But it closes a gap in his land that limits what he can develop. How much is it worth? Amelia said. To me, very little. To him, considerably more. Then that's what this is, she said. The water rights filing is leverage. He's not trying to win in court. He's trying to get you to the negotiating table frightened and distracted so you'll trade him the western parcel to make the lawsuit go away. The silence lasted 5 seconds. Then Garner said quietly, "That is exactly what this is." Nathaniel looked at Amelia. "What do we do?" he said. "We file the response citing the probate record," she said. "Today, we don't ask for a meeting, we don't reach out. We don't give him any indication that we're interested in a negotiation. We just file the response and let him understand that we found the probate record and his leverage is gone." She paused. "And then we wait. For what?" "For him to come to," she said. "Without the lawsuit as a weapon, he has nothing to offer except what he actually wants. And when a man asks for what he actually wants without a gun in his hand, the negotiation is entirely different." Garner looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at Amelia. "File the response," he said to Garner. Greer came to them on a Friday. Not with a letter this time. In person, which was itself information. A man who comes in person has decided that the written record is no longer his friend. Amelia was in the study when he arrived. She stayed in the study. Nathaniel received him in the front room, which she had suggested. Because the front room was neutral ground and the study was hers, and she did not want Greer in a space that had come to feel like something she'd built. She listened to the conversation through the door that she had left open exactly 1 inch, which was not eavesdropping so much as professional preparation. And she heard Greer's voice cycle through its familiar registers, pleasant, then pointed, then something closer to actual feeling, and she heard Nathaniel's responses, steady and unrushed, giving nothing away. Then she heard her name. "The Carter woman," Greer said. "She found the Caldwell probate record. She reviews documents thoroughly," Nathaniel said. "Yes. Your father's estate manager didn't find it in 20 years. My father's estate manager was not James Carter's daughter," Nathaniel said. A pause. "She's good," Greer said, and the grudging quality of it was genuine in a way his pleasantness never was. "She's exceptional," Nathaniel said. "No hedge, no qualification." Another pause. "I want the western parcel," Greer said. "I know," Nathaniel said. "Name your price." "I don't have one," Nathaniel said. "It's not for sale." "Brooks, it's not for sale." Silas, the first name. Not friendly, familiar in the way of two people who have known each other long enough to dispense with courtesy when they need to say something direct. "Drop the filing. Stop the campaign you've been running in Richmond society for 8 years. And we're done." "The campaign," Greer said carefully. "Eleanor is happy," Nathaniel said. "She has been for 5 years. Whatever story you've been telling about what I did to her, she doesn't need it told. She never asked you to tell it." A very long silence. "She's my cousin," Greer said, quietly, underneath the strategy. Underneath the pleasant smile, underneath everything, just that. "She's my cousin." "I know," Nathaniel said, "and I'm sorry for what I did to her." "I've been sorry for 8 years. But you've spent 8 years using that sorrow as a weapon, and it hasn't helped her, and it hasn't helped you, and it hasn't helped anyone." A pause. "Drop it, Silas, all of it. And we're finished." Amelia pressed her hand flat on the desk in front of her. She heard Greer's footsteps, the front room door, the entrance hall. Then nothing. She waited. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway of the study. He looked at her. "He'll drop it," he said. "How do you know?" she said. "Because I've known him for 30 years, Nathaniel said. And underneath everything he's done for the last 8. He's a man who felt guilty that he couldn't protect someone he loved and directed that guilt outward." He paused. "He just needed someone to tell him it was over." She looked at him. "You've understood that for 8 years, she said. "Yes, and you waited until now to say it." He looked at her steadily. "I wasn't ready until now." She thought about that. She thought about the things people carry and the difference between the moment you're ready to set them down and the long years before that moment arrives. "All right," she said. He said. The filing was withdrawn on a Monday. Garner sent a note. 3 lines. Amelia read it at the kitchen table while Thomas ate breakfast and then passed it across to him without comment. Thomas read it, set it down, went back to his eggs. "So it's over," he said. "That part is over," she said. He looked at her. "What part isn't?" he said. She thought about the conversation with Nathaniel in the study. 3 days ago. The thing that had opened in part 4 that neither of them had closed. The way he had said, "I've been willing to find out since the first night," and she had said all right, and he had said all right, and then they had both gone back to work, because they were, both of them, people who understood that the feeling and the life were different things, and both required attention. "None of your business," she said. "That means something good," Thomas said. She stood up and took her cup to the kitchen. "Go to school," she said. "It's Saturday," he said. "Then go read something. I'm reading something now." He held up his book. She looked at her brother, 15 years old, in a house that was not a punishment. At a table where he could read without watching the door. Eating breakfast without counting whether there was enough, and she felt something that was simply, without complication, gratitude. Not the managed, careful gratitude of someone who has learned to be thankful for small mercies. "The real kind," she said. He looked up. "I'm glad we're here," she said. He looked at her for a moment with their father's eyes. "Me too," he said. "I've been glad for weeks. You're just catching up." The social reckoning came in December, which Amelia had expected. Richmond in December was a series of dinners and gatherings that functioned less as celebration and more as annual inventory: who had risen, who had fallen, who had done something interesting enough to change their position in the room. She had attended enough of these events over the years to understand the rhythm of them. What she had not fully anticipated was attending them as herself. Catherine Aldrich held the first December dinner of the season, and she invited Amelia specifically. Not as a companion or a dependent or an afterthought, but as a named guest in her own right: Amelia Carter, estate manager. The invitation sat on the table in her small house for 2 days before she picked it up and wrote back. She wore her own dress. Not the green. She had taken the green dress out to the back of the estate grounds 3 weeks after moving in and burned it, which Thomas had watched with the solemn approval of someone participating in a necessary ritual. Her own dress was deep blue, well-made, paid for with her first month's salary, from a combined income that for the first time in 4 years meant she had money left at the end of the month. Nathaniel arrived at the door of her house at 7 o'clock to escort her, which was the first time he had done so publicly, and which both of them understood was a statement as clear as any announcement. She opened the door. He looked at her. "You look like yourself," he said. "I am myself," she said. "That's what I mean." She put on her coat. She took his arm. They walked to the carriage. Catherine's dining room held 20 people and approximately 40 opinions about what Amelia Carter was doing at that table and what Nathaniel Brooks' presence beside her meant for the various narratives that Richmond society had been running about both of them for the past 6 weeks. Amelia sat down and looked around the table. She recognized most of the faces. Harold Fentress, at the far end, who caught her eye and nodded with the small, precise approval she had come to understand, was his version of warmth. The woman who had counted her necklace when Greer arrived at Nathaniel's dinner she was reassessing. Amelia could see, running a new calculation, 3 people she had never met, who were watching her with the particular attention of people who had heard the story and were now comparing it to the person. She had been the story in Richmond for 6 weeks. She was accustomed to it now, in a way she hadn't been at the beginning, not comfortable with it. Exactly, but no longer destabilized by it. She had learned that being talked about was simply the cost of being visible. And that being visible was the cost of being real. And that being real was the only thing worth being. Her father had known that. She was learning it. Dinner began. And she was present for it fully, without the managed carefulness of the first dinner. without the armor of strategic silence. She spoke when she had something to say. She listened when others were saying things worth hearing. She disagreed with Harold Fentress about a point of county land law, and he argued back, and they spent 15 minutes in the specific pleasure of two people who know what they're talking about, sharpening their thinking against each other. At the other end, she was aware of Nathaniel not watching him, not performing for him, just aware of him the way you are aware of something that has become part of your landscape. The particular frequency of his attention, the way he moved through a room now, slightly differently than he had at his own dinner 6 weeks ago, not less contained, but less armored. The stone gentleman was still in there, but he was sharing the space with someone else now. Someone who laughed at Harold Fentress's counter-argument and meant it. She thought, this is what it looks like when someone decides to come back. She thought, I know what that costs. I know what it took. She thought, I'm glad he did. The moment that mattered happened after dinner. They were in Catherine's front room, the post-dinner gathering. Wine and conversation, and the particular loosening of social performance that comes when people have eaten well and are feeling, collectively, more honest than they were 2 hours ago. A woman named Grace Whitfield Young, recently arrived in Richmond from Charleston, with the bright attention of someone who had not yet learned to be careful, came to stand beside Amelia with a directness that bypassed social protocol entirely. You're Amelia Carter, she said. The one who managed the Greer situation. I was involved, Amelia said. And you run the Brooks estate. I manage it, yes. Grace Whitfield looked at her with transparent curiosity. How did you do it, she said. All of it. Starting from I've heard the story about the first dinner. About the dress they sent you in, and the chair he gave you and all of it. But everyone tells it like it was something that happened to you. And I keep thinking that it wasn't. It was something you did. She paused. How? Amelia looked at this young woman earnest, direct, standing in Catherine Aldrich's front room asking a real question without the social decoration that usually made real questions unrecognizable. She thought about the answer. She thought about her father's voice and Thomas's eyes and the faded green dress and the carved chair and 25 days and the probate record on page 12 and all the accumulated weight of what the last 6 weeks had actually been, stripped of the story that Richmond had made of it. I stopped waiting for someone to tell me I was worth something, Amelia said. And I started acting like I already knew. Grace Whitfield looked at her. That sounds simple, she said. It isn't, Amelia said. It costs everything the first time you do it, and then it costs less. And then less than that, she paused. But the first time is the one that matters. The first time you do it in a room that's told you you're nothing, and you decide you know better than the room, that's the one that changes things. Grace was quiet for a moment. The dinner, she said. That was your first time. The dress was my first time, Amelia said. When I put it on anyway. Something moved across the younger woman's face. Recognition. The specific recognition of someone who has their own dress. Their own version of the moment of deciding. Thank you, Grace said. Don't thank me, Amelia said. Find your version of it. That's all. She moved back into the room. Amelia stood for a moment with her wine glass and the particular quiet of someone who has just said something true. Then Nathaniel was beside her. I heard that, he said. The room is small, she said. What you said to her. She asked a real question, Amelia said. I gave her a real answer. You always, he said. He was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about what comes next, he said. For this. For us. He said us with the careful precision of someone who has thought about using the word for weeks and has decided it's time. I'm not interested in a long ambiguity, Amelia. I've had 8 years of ambiguity. I know what it costs. What are you saying? She said. I'm saying that I would like to know, he said, if you intend to stay. I have a contract, she said. I'm not going anywhere, not the estate, he said. Hear this, whatever this is. He held her gaze. I would like it to be something defined. Something chosen, not something we're both managing around. She looked at this man, the stone gentleman who had given a stranger his mother's chair, who had let her work in his library without asking for anything, who had told her true things about himself without being asked, who had stood to the side of the desk and let her work, who had said, "I've been willing to find out since the first night," and meant every word of it. She thought about what it cost to open something that had been closed. She thought about what it cost not to. "I intend to stay," she said. Something moved in his face, not surprise, but relief. The specific relief of someone who knew the answer but needed to hear it said. "Then I'd like to ask you something," he said. "Ask," she said. "Not tonight," he said. "Not here in Catherine's front room with 20 people listening." He looked at her. "Saturday, at the estate. I'll ask you on Saturday." She looked at him. She understood what Saturday meant. She felt the thing in her chest, the sealed place, cracked open and widening, and no longer frightening. Just real, just present, just hers, open the rest of the way. Saturday, he said. She told Thomas when she got home. He was in the kitchen, which was technically Saturday by then. And he was technically reading, and when she came in and sat down across from him without taking off her coat, he set the book down immediately. "Tell me," he said. When she finished, Thomas was quiet for a moment, in the way he got quiet when he was feeling something too large for his usual words. "Dad would have liked him," he said finally. She thought about that. "Yes," she said. "He would have. He would have argued with him about land law for 3 hours, and then decided he was a good man. Same as Fentress," Thomas said. "Similar," she said. Thomas looked at her across the kitchen table, 15 years old. In a house that was becoming a home, on an estate where the work was real, and the people were treated fairly, and the accounts were finally, painstakingly in order. "Are you happy?" he said. She thought about the question, not the reflex answer. The real one. She thought about the green dress and the chair and 25 days and Catherine Aldrich and Samuel Garrity and the probate record on page 12 and Grace Whitfield's face when she said, "Find your version of." It and Nathaniel standing to the side of the desk, listening, trusting her to know what she was doing. She thought about her father's voice. "Keep walking. The ground is there. You just can't see it yet." She had kept walking. The ground was there. "I think I am." Thomas nodded once, with the satisfaction of someone whose long-held assessment has finally been confirmed by the evidence. "Good," he said. He picked up his book. She sat at the table in her coat for another moment. In the house that was hers, on the estate where her work mattered, in the life she had built with her own hands from the rubble of everything she'd been sent to become. She thought about Saturday. She thought about what it meant to be asked something by a man who understood that asking, genuinely asking, without assumption or performance, was itself the answer to the question of who he was. She thought about the carved chair. She thought about her mother, who had taught her to do her hair neatly and honestly, and her father, who had shown her that a courtroom was just a room, and a room was just people, and people responded to truth delivered without cruelty. She thought about the dress they had chosen for her, and the woman she had been when she put it on, and the woman she was now. In this kitchen, in this house, on this land, in this life. They were not the same woman, but she carried the one who had buttoned those buttons with steady hands. And she would always carry her, because that woman in the faded green dress, in the ugly, deliberate wrongness of it, in the decision she had made between the second and third button, that woman had been the beginning of everything. She had been sent to be a weapon. She had arrived as one. But she had left as something no one in that room had seen coming, and no one had been able to stop. She had left as herself, and herself, it turned out, was more than enough. It had always been more than enough. The only thing that had needed to change was her willingness to know it.